Hi, my name is Reina Lombardi, and I'm an art therapist and mental health counselor, and I own Florida Art Therapy Services. And we've decided to bring you this series of conversations with the therapists that work at the practice. And we've titled it Expressions and Reflections, which we feel captures a lot of the work that we do with clients, helping them to express themselves more freely and um, connect with what's going on within themselves and find other ways to um, bring about meaning without words. Sometimes that's imagery. Obviously, using art, we use a lot of imagery, but it could be sculptural, it could be musical, it could be movement. And then, of course, the other part of that is reflecting upon that like once we're creating something, the important part of the meaning making comes back to reflecting upon that experience. Without further ado, here's our conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the Expressions and Reflections videos from Florida Art Therapy Services. I'm Rain Lombardi. I'm the owner of the practice. And today I'm talking with Leeanna Mantica. And she is also a registered art therapist. And thanks for doing this with me, Leeanna.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just kind of talk like, how did you get involved with art therapy? Like, how did you discover it and like what brought you to this work?
Yeah. So I first heard the term art therapy in high school. My grandmother had Alzheimer's and she was a very difficult, terrible disease. She passed away, and my mom was reading the newspaper and saw an article that talked about how art therapy was helping people who had dementia.
Mm.
And she cut out the clipping and brought it home and showed it to me. And the word fascinated me, first of all, because it had art in it. And I loved art. I was very creative. I am very creative. And yet I wanted more. I wanted to help people. So I thought, well, maybe this is something that I could explore. But then I got my degree in psychology because I thought, well, I could still branch out. I could still do something else with that. It's practical. It's like, these kind of half steps towards a goal in this very terrifying world and the economy and everything. And there's not many art therapists. Most people, when they meet me, I am the one and only art therapist that they have ever met or maybe will ever meet. So there's an incredible like weight, right, that I carry around on
Mm.
my shoulders to kind of represent the field. I remember searching and trying to find an art therapist to talk to or, ask questions. And this was before YouTube, before like all of this like incredible access to information that we have today. But and so yeah, I got my degree in psychology from Florida Gulf Coast University. And then I only applied to two graduate programs because that was all I could afford at the time. And really, really wanted to get into FSU, Florida State,
Mhm.
because they have a research assistantship and that would pay for my schooling. So I thought, well, I'm going into this field. It's still a little iffy. I've never really met an art therapist. I'm not really sure, but this sounds a lot like me. So they're going to pay for it. Let's just do it. And I went into it with that attitude. And I remember sitting in my first graduate course, Dave Gussack was talking, and I just remember looking around the room, this cohort of 12 incredible women, and thinking like, I've arrived. These are my people. This is what I'm meant to do. And I think that
Oh.
every day, still to this day, still even through the burnout, even through all of life's ups and downs, 9 years later, um, I feel incredibly privileged to walk into people's lives, walk into their children's lives, and help them using art.
Hmm. So, how do you use art therapy with children and teens that you work with? Um, yeah, talk to us a little bit about
Yeah.
your approach.
Well, you have to understand that it's it's incredibly dependent on the individual.
Mhm.
Um, and I have a very humanistic approach. We develop treatment goals together, and it's just really collaborative and tuned in to that person as a person.
Mhm.
And with that being said, there's common presentations across the board. Um, to talk about diagnoses a little bit, although I don't diagnose it, a lot of people will come in and say, oh, my son or daughter was diagnosed with ADHD or anxiety. Um, and we tried therapy and it's just not working, or I don't want to put them on medication. What else can I do? And so they start to look for alternative options. Although I really feel that it should be art therapy should be, at the forefront. And I think it's getting there, right? It's like
Mhm.
covered under certain Medicaid forms of Medicaid, and we're seeing it more as a protected, profession in other states. And um so I kind of just, the individual comes in, I look at their presentation, just the same way any other therapist would. And then afterwards, just kind of tailor the directive to them. So I find that it's incredibly helpful, particularly with children and adolescents, because their verbal linguistic skills are not as developed as an adult. In particular, a lot of the diagnoses that they're coming to see me with, the like little cluster of,
Mhm.
ADHD, a little bit of like being on the spectrum, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, that they come in and find such a relief in this. It's this unburdening,
Mhm.
of not having to explain myself and find the right words, or say the right things, that I can express everything I need to through the art materials. Um,
Mhm.
in the same way too, I'll use those art materials, as I said earlier, to challenge them, because so often you'll see, 6-year-olds coming in and their parent is talking about, oh, all of these behavioral issues in this time when they were at the swimming pool, and they, had a huge temper tantrum because they didn't want to leave.
Oh,
And you
yeah.
go to, talk to the kid about it, and you really don't get anything, because kids, like, I can't even remember what they had for lunch sometimes,
Mhm.
let alone like just the shame that is induced from having your parent like have to, step in and say this event that happened, and that recall that may or may not be there. It just
Sure.
adds on. It's like slather on the shame butter. So I think that using the art as a way to facilitate um like appropriate interactions,
Mhm.
to increase that frustration tolerance, to encourage adaptive thinking. So for
Mhm.
example, like that same kid, we'd be drawing side by side, and they only want to draw with like a black colored pencil, but of course they're pressing way too hard with the colored pencil because, pressure
Mhm.
regulation, what is that? And it snaps. And I, as a therapist, just wait. I'm just going to sit back and observe what happens? And we wait and we can see the frustration is building. And then I can start to, coach them through it. Like, I'm not going to immediately provide you with a pencil sharpener. I'm not going to, I want you to find your own solutions to that.
Mhm.
Right. And so that you only get that in the art making. You only
Yeah.
get that. So they start to, oh, I'm noticing that you're really frustrated. Let's kind of breathe through it. Listen, hey, it happened to me the other day. I snapped my pencil, boop, right off. What else do you think you could do? Do you see any other colors here that you'd like to try? And we work through that. Lo and behold, there was one other black pencil. Wasn't as sharp, but we've accepted that and we're moving on.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a progression and a building of those skills. They start small in those
Mhm.
interactions, but then you discuss it with the parent, and you also encourage the parent to view their progress in these tiny milestones
Yeah,
along
that's
the
so
way.
important.
It is
So
so important.
important.
Honestly, the majority of my sessions are are with parents, if not 50-50. Um, because it's an hour a week. What
Mhm.
we're gonna reinforce all of these things learned and these experiences. Let's solidify them so that you're getting the most out of your time spent here.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that there's like so much that we can do with like the sensory
Mm,
piece when kids
yeah.
have a lot of like sensory aversiveness.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I had a session this week where that was the goal with finger painting with a kid who like just can't tolerate anything being on their hands for more than a minute. It's like, okay, I need to wash my hands. And like, we can't leave the room and go wash hands, for you to wash hands to come back and put it right back in the paint. But like, that's like the level, like, there's a desire to engage in the material, but it's like, oh, it's so uncomfortable, right? So like the
Right.
goal is to
The
stretch.
stimulation.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll see that with it, there's different sensory issues and everybody has their own unique needs, and some
Mhm.
kids would love finger painting. They would love it, and other kids cannot stand it. And you may think, well, what's the problem? It's just personal preference. Well, it's a problem because when that child is, in the lunchroom, right, and gets something sticky on their hand and then has a meltdown and can't return to class, that's why it's a problem, because you need to still be able to function in an ableist world, right?
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I approach, like, if I'm going to do any kind of like treatment with like sensory issues, kind of approach that in the framework of, I'm just trying to get you by in this world that is not suited to you and your unique needs,
Mhm.
right? That doesn't allow you to immediately go and wash your hands whenever you would like.
Mhm. Yeah,
And you know
it's
what?
tough.
When you're an adult, you can do that. So it's okay.
Maybe. Maybe.
Maybe, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think too, there's also benefits like when some kids are like engaging in some kind of demand avoidance, that activity that they're attempting to avoid actually may have really beneficial neurological development benefits from engaging in that, particularly when it comes to sensory play.
Mhm,
That like those things, those types of engagement activities are helping to create different neural nets that are going to be beneficial for the child, to be able to pick up and have like learn pre-academic skills, for example, which are just kind of the general things that we need to know before we even start learning, right? Like the
mhm.
little bits and pieces. So, and that part is important too, that they're given that opportunity. And sometimes I think, like, and no offense to parents, like, I totally understand you don't want mess in your house, but there is a benefit for the mess. And like sometimes kids are like, they're so excited to come in because they're like, mess, I can
Oh,
make a
oh yeah.
mess,
Oh yeah.
right? Like, I
I
can't
have
do this
one
at home.
I have one that like just, he loves to make things and sculpt things, and we're talking plaster and clay, and lately he's been into making prehistoric tools. So we've been banging on rocks outside. It's very much cathartic release.
That's amazing. I love that.
But yeah, I think that play, recess is so limited, and they'll have their specials, and they get art once a week, right?
Right.
But
If that.
right, and we're so screen reliant, and that it is like when the kids come in, oftentimes they're very excited because it's so
Mhm.
different and the space is so welcoming. We have all the toys and different things that can engage them in a way that they probably wouldn't be engaged in a typical, setting.
Right. Yeah, I think just in general, having experiential therapy approaches when working with kids is super important. Because what you're saying, like their linguistic skills aren't really there. Plus, it can feel like a lot of pressure. It's just not their language. Their language is the play, and it is that experimentation and
Mhm.
engagement. And so what do you say when like a parent says, well, when's the real therapy gonna start? How do you help them to kind of understand that what the child is doing through this playfulness and experimentation and creativity
Mhm. I think
does
I
have
do
that?
that. I guess I've never had that direct question before. No one yet has had the
Mm,
audacity. Um,
wow.
but I have had, people say like, yeah, I could see how this would be good for, if like it's like for a certain type of person. They say it like that.
Well,
It's
they're a
kind of
little more
like,
diplomatic
it's a
than what
little,
I've heard
it's the
over the
South,
years.
it's the South. It's like there's not, but I would say that I do at least in part. I try to make it explicit to the parent what what's going on there, right? So if it's a very young child, the parent or guardian is obviously going to be highly involved in their treatment, not so much with like older kids.
Yeah.
But with the young kids, we show the drawing or whatever. If they're comfortable at the end of session, most of the time they'll run up and like, look what I did, da, da, da. And I
Yeah.
kind of like point it out. We talk about the different parts, and I'll say, isn't it interesting, that the daddy isn't here, that I'm noticing that like brother is very small, and like not to make any assumptions, but most often it's reflective of something going on in the child's life or something that we've just talked about.
um, Even though they're engaging in something that's creative, it goes beyond that, that like
Mhm.
it's really about their lived experience. And that even in childhood, the unconscious moves forward through the symbolism in the way the images are rendered,
Oh yeah.
in the selection of toys or activities. Earlier you were talking about how you're making, prehistoric tools by banging rocks outside, right? There's that need to release some pent up aggression, maybe some internalized aggression, that the child really knows. In play therapy, They talk about how the child really knows exactly what they need to do in order to heal themselves. If we
That's
just give them the space and allow them the opportunity to do that. But
mhm,
oftentimes we don't, because we live in a very adult world, and we have society rules and expectations, and like there's a lot of telling children what to do and not allowing children to be children in the way society operates. And I understand that, right? There's a time and a place, but I think kids need more of that, um, that ability to just follow their own instinct
mhm,
in their creative exploration and play and expression.
mhm. Yeah, it's remarkable how much their cognitions, their thoughts are revealed in their art and in their play.
Mhm.
And I I see that most with my own daughter, become
Mm.
I witness it the most with my own daughter. So like I can't help but do it, I guess, being an art therapist mom. But post Hurricane Ian, I remember we sat together. We went up to the clubhouse right by the swimming because it just had the pool, and maybe we'd be able to go to the pool, and we couldn't. So we
Mm.
sat outside and we were drawing, and her drawing suddenly was filled with rain clouds and these huge, heavy raindrops falling down. Like it started off, it was just her and I as little encephalopods, little heads with legs sticking out, and we're picking flowers. And I thought, oh, this is lovely. I'm a wonderful mother. My child is so well adjusted. And then she added in the rain. Not to say that if your kid draws a rainstorm, but obviously in the context of us just experiencing a huge natural disaster, right? It makes
Mhm.
sense because
Yeah.
it had rained for days on end, and it was terrifying. So, it's just something to keep an eye on, and I definitely did. And the big raindrops eventually went away. But it'll show up like even in the games that she's playing, or the play of my clients too in session. It's so interesting to see. Like I was doing a play therapy kind of intervention, and a kiddo had kind of arranged these little animals inside of a pen. Said they were at school, and they were all underneath the desks because, yeah. Um, but none of that would have come about
Mhm.
had I directed the play, right? Had I kind of intervened in any way. I was just that supportive space and the witness to that child's processing of the traumatic event,
Mhm.
which occurs all through it. So it's not a matter
Yeah.
of like when does the therapy actually start. It's been happening.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it is. It's like, it how do I put it? I'm at a loss for words. I want to really articulate it, but sometimes I think that people's perception about what therapy is, it's like, those memes, like what people think I do,
Yeah.
what
Versus what I actually do.
what I thought I was going to do,
Right.
what I was told I was going to do, what I actually do, right? Like for careers and
Mhm.
things. But I think that relates to what we do as therapists as well, particularly when we're talking about working with children in terms of people's exposure. The majority of their exposure to therapy is stuff that they see on television, which is very Freudian, probably
Couch based.
couch
Yeah.
based, psychoanalytic based, right? And not that like that does not happen, but that that's not what's happening when you're working with a kid. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of physical movement,
Mhm.
there's a lot going on.
Mhm.
And I always say, you know, I choose all the materials that are in the room for a specific reason. So everything that's in the room has some kind of therapeutic value. So it doesn't matter what the child selects,
Mhm.
that 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 they're going to make use of that in a way that best suits them. So I don't have to worry. Like, okay, if the child chooses to go and play in the dollhouse, there's something that's beckoning them there. There's
There's
something that's
value to be gained here. Right. Right.
they need to work through something through
Mhm.
that.
Right.
And we might then leave there and go over to paper and
Mm,
retranslate that. But it's about that flexibility
mm.
of following the child's creative expression and not really worrying about, you know, how it all unfolds.
Right. It's very intuitive, you know. It's using your own skills as a therapist and respecting the child's innate sense of need of their own needs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think sometimes it's hard if like somebody's used to this idea of like, well, this is what therapy is over here.
Mhm.
Well, then what are you doing? Because it kind of looks fun.
Yeah. I
And
would
and it
rather
can
get
be.
that question than get the question of, well, why is it any therapy needed in the first place? You know, then have to deal with like the stigma that comes from seeking therapy of any form to begin with.
Yeah, therapy's not
Right.
a bad thing. And
There's I go through much more of like that sort of justification process.
mm,
Um of just in general of why that's why things look okay on the outside, you know, um
yeah.
or like they're not getting bad grades, they're okay, like why why is this needed, right?
Hmm.
So it's hard to unpack that and kind of not just advocate for your client and your client's needs, but also just, for yourself, for, the profession in general.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, because I said earlier, like, we have some coverage, our therapists have some coverage here, there, some protections here, there, but I may very well be the only art therapist someone meets. There's a loneliness to it. And there is a battle sometimes that occurs, like to say
Yeah.
like this is good, this is, I promise it's good.
Right. Yeah, in some ways I think maybe there's like a sales job about like therapy in itself
Absolutely.
has a stigma, but now art therapy, like what?
Mhm.
Like you
Yeah.
how is this beneficial? But I think like we were starting talking about with children how um, it can help learn different types of adaptive skills. It can help them to increase frustration tolerance and delay gratification.
Right.
But it can also become a healthy outlet for them to express feelings,
Mhm.
thoughts, and
Yep.
concepts that they may not be able to verbally articulate yet, and maybe coming out or manifesting as a maladaptive behavior or undesirable behavior. So it can help change some of those behaviors,
Right.
but as we go into like preteens, tweens, teens,
Mhm.
it kind of shifts and takes on a different form. And
Absolutely.
so, how do you shift the process when you're working with some of the older kids that maybe have started to develop a vocabulary around feelings, but they're
Mhm.
still struggling in a variety of ways, whether that's feeling depressed or anxious, or like struggling socially with social skills,
Mhm.
or just regulating their emotions in general.
Yeah. Um, Definitely it shifts, right? Because with the teenagers, we're approaching adulthood. So there's a certain level of independence when it comes to, selection of materials, even just accepting feedback at the beginning of, well, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to explore this, or, there's more of a negotiation that goes on. Sometimes I will also see more of a resistance from teens. It's very interesting to see how art therapy breaks down those walls, um, and will reveal things maybe that they didn't even intend to reveal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Um, so it kind of facilitates that conversation, and it provides a bridge between
Hmm.
us, because there is a gap. There's a generational gap. I'm a stranger. I am this, adult. Who is this person? Teenagers come in and there's like it's just a general, like, give me what you got kind of thing. That I'll oftentimes see. And the art making provides this way to break through any of those walls that are built up with them. And I think it also gives them an additional coping skill,
Hmm.
um, that they wouldn't otherwise have, or just kind of explore aspects of their identity, because that's what's really going on in their world at the end of the day. But who am I
Yes.
really? What am I good at? What am I gonna do? Where am I going? What's this person thinking?
Hmm.
There's so many, like, questions that are occurring during that time as their identity is
Hmm.
coalescing. Um,
Yeah, it's a different kind of existential crisis. We
right, it
typically think about that like end of life, right? People are kind of like doing that wrap up. But in teenagers, like there is an existential crisis
is.
because
Mhm.
there is a death of childhood that
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
grieving and kind of coping with, because they're going to have to, like you said, they're going to have to become independent. There's a pressure to like know what you want to do for the rest of your life because society is saying you need to do this,
Mhm.
because if you don't do this then you won't be able to do this, and if you can't do that then you can't do this, then you can't and then your whole life is ruined,
Right.
right? Like we teach kids catastrophic thinking
Right.
from a societal level,
Yeah.
from the pressure on them to know they don't need to know what they're going to do for the rest of their lives. This is a time, young adulthood is a time for exploration, for
Mm.
developing an understanding of self and what that self needs in order to thrive. Where are they going to be best suited
Mhm.
versus needing to have your life figured out at 16 and having the
Mhm.
dots plotted on the course. But a lot of times I feel like the teens, at least some of the ones that I work with, where they're really high achieving and they have a lot of perfectionistic expectations about
Mm.
themselves. And it's like they feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't take this other AP class, then I'm not going to get the GPA. And then I'm not going to get into UF. And then if I don't get into UF, then, and it's like, whoa, 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 let's slow it down,
Right. Very much high functioning anxiety at 16. Yeah.
right?
I definitely relate to that, because a lot of my clients are highly intelligent. Maybe it's not recognized by their their school or the academics, but they are intelligent, and they just kind of are going through this world trying to navigate amidst all of these heavy demands. It starts in high school. Now we have high schools with, they have these programs, these AP and IB and dual enrollment
Right.
and, you know, Harvard and all this stuff. That wasn't around when I had AP, but like even, like
Mm-hmm.
my kindergartner, not to go back to like talking about young kids, but like what's expected of her? Are you kidding me?
Oh yeah. In my okay, so I started kindergarten in 1979
Mm-hmm.
and we still had nap time. The majority of the day we played. It was like pre-K.
Yeah.
Um, we did some
There's some
learning.
writing, some cursive.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, there's this incredible intense pressure, right? Geared towards i- i- young adults and going to college and doing the right thing and making these career moves. And at the end of the day, you're just trying to figure out like, do you want blue raspberry or cherry Slurpee at the 7-Eleven?
Right. That would be a good day if that's the hardest decision you have to make, right? Um, but I think that's puts it into perspective is that that's not the decisions that they're
Yeah.
making. They're feeling an immense amount of pressure to perform and excel and do well. And that can feel like different kids are going to respond in different ways. Some kids are going to hold it all in and really try to push harder, work harder, and overcome it at their own detriment to their own health and functioning. Other
Mhm.
kids are going to be like, I'm out, I'm
Right.
done, I'm
Right.
dropping out, I'm giving up, I'm doing something else. And but either option is not a health is not the healthy option. It's like, how do I cope with the present moment and not race too far off into the future, not be worried too
Mhm.
far back about what happened a couple years ago. What's going on in the present moment? What are my current interests, desires? What's reasonable, right?
Mhm.
How do we help them? I feel like in the art, kind of explore that ability to just be in the present moment, just
Mhm.
focus on accepting themselves as they are in the present moment, because there's so much lack of acceptance of self in teenagehood.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, it definitely in the same way with younger kids of like intentionally choosing or maybe guiding them towards certain materials. Um I do the same with teens, starting off with very like success oriented printmaking or using like different inks and just watching them flow across the page, learning those mindfulness skills. Um, some of them who usually, I'm going to just say, like in general, if I see you by the time you're a teen, you're that internalizing type. If I see you younger, you're more the externalizer. You've gotten in trouble at school. You might be throwing fisticuffs. But in general, if I see you by the time you're a teen, you're an internalizer. So getting them to sort of recognize
mhm,
when negative perfectionistic self-talk is occurring, and then also accept when it's good enough,
mm,
or accept when that art product doesn't look like what you wanted it to.
yeah, yeah.
um and that's how it occurs in real time. You
Mhm,
see it happen in real time. This like if you just kind of encourage them to talk aloud, or you'll see it reflected again in the artwork of this, um these cognitive distortions coming
mm,
up. And that's when you can really start to address those and reframe them.
mhm.
um
It's
right then and there.
in vivo, right?
In vivo, yes.
We're we're engaging in an activity that brings out the problematic stuff that's impacting their daily functioning, and we're working with them in that moment
Right.
to rehearse and try a new way of dealing with it.
Mhm. And that's built upon that foundation that I talked about of the mindfulness, the developed coping skills that have already been established
Mhm,
through those like playful, success oriented art therapy
mhm,
directives
mhm.
that happen in the beginning. So you build this rapport, and then okay, now we can start to switch or talk about these. Let me see if I can get some of these, like, oh, suck at this, or oh, this isn't right. You
Mhm,
just that'll come out when they're
mhm,
making art. It can't help you can't help it because those just judgments, even you
mhm.
and I make them from time to
Yes,
time.
of
Yeah,
course.
of course. And it's not like, hey, listen, you don't suck at this. It's your first time doing
Mhm,
it. Let's be a little nice to yourself.
mhm.
I'm trying something
Yeah,
new. you know.
it's
So
interesting how much can be observed in just watching how they go about making art
mhm,
and the choices that they make or don't make,
right.
how quickly they give up, right?
Mhm,
Like sometimes in my groups at the crisis center, um, I see lots of kids. We see kids from, small kids to 18 on the unit there. And even young ones, tweens,
mhm.
teens, it happens for each one. Um, but I'll see it where a whole piece of paper is used. They'll make like a teeny, like maybe like a teen, and they're like, "That's it. I need a new piece of
That's
paper,
big.
Miss.
Yeah,
I've messed up already. I need a new piece of paper."
right.
And like, if they were allowed to, they would just go through paper after paper
Mhm,
with like maybe making two lines, and then it would crumple it up and it would be, a meltdown. But that is so reflective of how difficult a time they are
mhm,
coping with their frustration and their emotions. And if
mhm.
that's what's happening there, oh my gosh, can you imagine
Right.
what it's like in the
And
classroom for
and the
them?
and their self-confidence too. There's no right or wrong in art. Who's walking up to say that those two lines that you drew were like looked wrong, but
Mhm,
you were the only one that's doing that today. Um,
mhm,
that there's like this like real harshness that you can call attention to as well. And say like, I want you to say what you just said, but say it to me. Say it really mean, like to me. And they can't do it. And I'm like, and why are you saying that to yourself? Why
mhm.
were why are we doing that?
Right. The
Also learning
relationship.
to self-advocate in that moment before the crumpling meltdown starts. So, stopping them and saying, like, would you like to ask for some help? Would you like a ruler? Or like kind of encouraging them to like tune in to themselves when
Mhm,
that frustration is building and recognize when they may need support or when they need to take a break and or maybe try something else. It's reflective not just in that moment, but I'm sure of many other moments in their life. You just
yeah.
replace the paper and pencil with, they're driving in their car,
Mm,
and there's a road rage incident, or they can't park right, or they can't find parking, or they just give up because they don't know where they're going. And it's pervasive in all areas of your life.
mhm,
Um, that because it stems from your internal thought processes. Just never, they never leave you, but you can leave them.
mhm.
You can leave those behind.
Can learn a new way of speaking to yourself, thinking about yourself, thinking about life and
Mhm.
navigating it. It just takes practice and rehearsal.
Right.
And sometimes it takes a long time if somebody's been really, really rigidly thinking for a long time. The myelin that is built up on those neural connections is
The
really.
myelin sheath.
Yes, the myelin sheath is really, really heavily laid down. And,
Mhm.
the more we repeat an action, the stronger that reaction becomes, so that it increases the likelihood that that's going to continue, even if it's not serving us well. And so if you have somebody who's been engaging in really, challenging ways of thinking, it takes a long time to start to unpattern all of that and to develop a stronger network of more adaptive ways of doing things. And I think
Right.
that's important for parents to understand that.
It's so important. It is so important. Can you imagine, like, if I had access to therapy when I was younger, I'm so, it makes me really excited though for Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Like, it makes me really excited because they're they're going through it so early. They're learning these skills so early in life. And there is that neural plasticity, and their brains are
Mhm,
still forming and growing. And then they can take all of those skills that they've learned in art therapy sessions and apply them going forward into the world.
mhm,
I love it. I love working with children and teens, and I love art therapy. So exciting.
yeah. Well, if people were interested in having their child or teen work with you, what's the best way of connecting?
So the best way of connecting would be to contact the office of Florida Art Therapy Services. That's, what is it? 239
239,
7900
it's 7099.
7099.
Yeah, a little flippy floppy, but
A little
239
dyslexia.
297 7099. And of course
Yes.
we'll put that on the screen after our video ends. And you can call and ask to be paired with Leanna. And or you can hop on our website and uh, www.floridaarttherapyservices.com, and there's contact buttons all over, and you can just send us a message too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me, Reina.
Yeah, thanks for doing this with me, and I hope that it's helpful for people that are watching.
Awesome.